Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Decoding Business Behaviours podcast, the first in a series of podcasts that are all about hiring and hiring for behaviours rather than on previous experience being the main factor. We're presented by Aspire Recruitment, and you'll see more information about those at the end. Every week I'm going to be joined by Aspire's Global Managing Director, Terry Payne, who's going to discuss behaviours with us and share some of his expertise over 20 plus years in staffing, as well as a large portion of that being leading companies and being in charge of the hiring and building out that culture within a business. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Tommy. Yeah, it's great to be able to talk about this subject. It's something that's quite close to my heart, so I'm ready when you are.
Perfect. So I guess we should start at the very beginning. Why don't we talk about what are behaviours when it comes to business?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I came up with thinking about behaviours in business specifically was I worked for a number of different organisations, and there's always mission statements on the wall. This is how we want a company to be. And I did a bit of research, speaking to people. Can you tell me what the mission statements are of the organisations that you work in? And quite often they couldn't. And I realised that actually it's about the behaviours in business that then bring you to your mission statement. So for me, behaviours in business is about how people turn up every day. It's the behaviours that you see in them that are just in their personality that they can bring into the business. Because most things that we do in business, they're learned skills, right? You can teach someone to do recruitment, you can teach someone to pick up the phone. But what you can't teach someone is a growth mindset, is a positive outlook on life, is the resilience that you need. So for me, that's where behaviours came about. If you can get the behaviours right, does that then mean that will lead you to your mission statement?
Perfect. So it's a set of words or phrases that are basically the characteristics that are building up maybe the person who works for your business, maybe the way you go about business. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often refer things like behaviours back to take it out of business and just think about if you're a family person, how do you want your children to behave? So people often say to me, it's not how your children behave at home, it's how they behave in other people's house that says that you've got the behaviours right. So I really thought about those human behaviours that we all have, and then how do they then transfer into a business environment?
Okay, perfect. And I mentioned at the top about how does that fit in within a culture. Are behaviours culture? Is culture and behaviours the same thing, or is there a difference?
No, I think so. For me, I think that behaviours create culture. Okay, so I don't think you can have a great culture without the right behaviours. And I'll give you a quick example. I know of organisations, or I've seen in certain teams, in sales organisations, where you can have a top performer, right? A really top performer, earning lots of commission, but they've got really bad behaviours.
Right.
And what it actually does is causes a toxic environment, and it destroys the culture. But often, and what's happened in business in the past, we protect those people because of the money. However, if you have the right behaviours with a number of people, and a group of people, so let's call it 10, 20, 30 people, they will always outperform that top biller. But also you've got longevity and you've got a good culture. And when people are in a good culture and the behaviours are right, that leads to a high performance.
So they work perfectly sort of in tandem. You need the behaviours to fit within a culture, and you also need that culture to sort of supercharge those behaviours and deliver you results.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that any culture is built on the right behaviours. I'm a big football fan, we see that. I'm a Chelsea fan, so don't boo. But if you look at the Chelsea team currently now, the behaviours are right. You know, you've got players blaming each other, and it doesn't. You don't have a highly successful team. And I think that when you get the behaviours right and everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, the culture naturally comes. So for me, yes, they're in line, but culture comes second to having the right behaviours.
Right. So behaviours first, and then you build that culture. We're going to talk about this in more detail in future episodes. But as we're sort of doing a top line here, I wonder if we talk about how do you go about identifying behaviours? How do you sit there within an organisation that may be very successful, maybe moderately successful, maybe looking for a bounce back year? How do you start in looking at what your behaviours are?
Yes, it's really interesting. So it's a tough thing to do, but what we tend to look at is, and I'm learning some of this on a seminar I was doing, that you're looking at performance and then you're looking at behaviour. It's almost like an axis. And what you're doing is you're plotting your people against those core behaviours. So first and foremost, to go back a step, you need to decide what are the behaviours that you want in the business. Okay, so it could be resilience, it could be growth mindset, it could be communication, so on and so forth. And then what you do is you start to rag your people against it. So you rag performance versus behaviours. Now, interestingly, we've done this exercise before, and you can have a really high performer, but the behaviour's all over here, or you could have someone who is lower in performance, but they've got all the right behaviours. And then what tends to happen is you can then earmark these people moving up. The good behaviours, they will always move up. So the first thing is a bit of an assessment of your staff. You absolutely need to do an assessment. The second thing to come up with those behaviours and that you need to focus on is, what do you believe are the right behaviours for the type of business that you're running? Now, it varies, right? Yeah. So if you're running a library, you might not want someone that is constantly communicating externally, right? Yeah. So it might not work out for you. So I think it's about establishing the behaviours that you want in your business and that will propel your business, analysing the people in those behaviours, and then the most important thing, Tommy, is I think being brave.
Yeah, you have to take a leap of faith, don't you? You can't just, if you're trying to implement a behaviour system, you can't go, we'll gradually move to it, because actually that will take longer to yield, won't it, the results that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think often people talk about, I want to run a high-performing business, and think that you can just get a high-performing business at the click of a finger. You can't. It's a leap of faith. You have to have a methodology that I want to change the business. I want to move the business to a more behaviours or high performance, and then the leap of faith. You've summed it up. It's exactly that's a leap of faith. Now, what that does mean is that you may lose some people on that journey. Okay, but sometimes you have to break it to make it. And then slowly you'll start to move to the right behaviours, but it takes time. It's habit forming as well. It's massively about a leap of faith, and it's hard because I think that often people look at their organisation in tough times, they don't look at it in good times. Much easier to change behaviours when you're looking for a bounce back. You mentioned a bounce back because you think, well, I've got nothing to lose, so I might as well change behaviours now. I like to think about changing behaviours when you're in good times as well, because that's when it's really, really important.
You're almost fortifying yourself for the bad times, aren't you? You know, we think about the last few years we've been through. COVID, then business is good, then business is slow, then business is up, we're getting economic forecasts, etc., etc. So there's so many external factors that affect your business. Behaviours seem like a really good way to make your business almost downturn, I wouldn't say proof, but armoured. You know, you're giving yourself a sort of a hardened shell for when things become a bit trickier.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one of our core behaviours that we're driving is resilience. I would challenge people, how resilient do you have to be in business in an upturn in the economy? Well, not very, right? Because you're already on this upward trajectory. It's actually building that resilience in the good times, that when the tough times come, that they're able to step up to the challenge. Okay, we've been through this before, battle hardened, I've got the scars, right? And I think that sometimes with behaviours is when we're performing at a high level, we allow those behaviours to slip because we're making money. But I always think that money is a byproduct of good behaviours. If you let them slip, it's really hard to get them back.
Yeah. I think that's so true. When you're picking your behaviours, I mean, you've listed off some that we have at Aspire, and some that other organisations. I mean, if you have salespeople, resilience is going to be a really key behaviour for you. But would you ever create a list of negative behaviours? So we've talked about the positive behaviours. Would you also do, okay, well, what are the behaviours we want to avoid as a business?
It's a good question. I haven't personally created a negative list of behaviours because I tend to look at what are the core behaviours that make someone successful and able to have all of the skills to be able to grow. And I think the negative list comes from people that don't demonstrate those core behaviours. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the behaviours some of the behaviours that we have here, these are behaviours that I think will transcend into all companies. A growth mindset, so looking for solutions. It's really easy to say, I'd be much more successful with the grass is greener and the sun always shone. And
I had this tool and that tool.
Yeah. I mean, you'll know in your job, it's always about the next tool that will solve the problem. But often it's about having a growth mindset of saying, okay, so we are in the economy we're in, we have got the situation we've got. but what's the solution?
Yeah.
Because the moment you blame someone else, you're never thinking internally about how you can be better.
Yeah.
And I think that can go into any business. It doesn't matter what business you work in, or growth mindset. So for me, it's really about behaviours of really these things that we have in our personalities that people can have with no education, they can have if they come from a different background. It doesn't really matter, but it's in their DNA.
Yeah, so it's sort of that inherent thing, and in line with that, you talked about you may be trying to implement your behaviours and it may take 6, 12, 18, it may take you a very little amount of time because inadvertently you've already hired the sort of cultural, the sort of behavioural fit people that you were looking for. But you said there about don't worry about losing people who don't fit in the blueprint. That's a really hard thing to do. You have to be really brave to do that. Anyone listening whose instant reaction is, I'm sat there thinking about, it'd be great to have behaviours in my network agency or in my marketing business or in my warehouse, but I know my top performer is not going to fit with what I want to do. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is it's all about communication, and I'll say it 3 times: communication, right? Because it always goes in. Is you can't just draw up a list of behaviours and then go, right, that person's not doing those behaviours, they need to go. But I think it's about communicating those behaviours. This is how we want to be as a business. This is how we want everybody to be respected, and how we'll drive our business forward. And then it's really for people to then work to those behaviours because it's habit forming. Now. Lots of people will have these behaviours in them, but it's about boundaries then. So boundaries and behaviours. So I'll try and explain this point. So let's say you use an example. I've got a top performer. Someone out there listening says, "He's got a top performer." No, I can't lose them. Right? He's crazy. He's off his head. The first thing you need to do is communicate the behaviours that you want, and then you have to set boundaries. Right? And the boundaries are there to say, look, as long as you're creating these behaviours and doing the things, everything above that is brilliant. Anything below that is not acceptable for the company that we are building. Because at some point you have to make if anybody listening wants to move their company to the next level, you have to draw a line in the sand. You have to go, right, what do we want to do? Who do we want to be? What's our identity? And the core behaviours, this is what they are. And then you've got that line, kind of that theoretical line, and anything below that is over the boundary. Anything above that is all good.
You mentioned at the start, it's how your kids behave. The way you've given that example, it is kind of like parenting, isn't it? But in a sort of sideways move, in that you're setting boundaries, you're setting expectations. If Johnny draws on the wall, one of your favourite metaphors, there's a consequence. Keeps doing it, you have to kind of make a decision around that. I think that's really interesting. I think a statistic that I read earlier today is that 84% of recruiters state that cultural fit is now becoming one of the key factors when recruiting. I think behaviours really factor into that, and I think that's why it's so important to know. You may be sat in that 26% that you're not thinking about behavioural and cultural fit when it comes to your business, or you may be just looking at, we've got this kind of culture here. I think it's going to, as we move forward, become something that's really, really important. And people are going to stop looking at that CV so frequently, or those previous achievements, and they're really going to start focusing in on, do you fit the kind of person that we want to have within our business?
Yeah, I think recruitment, I think hiring's come a long way. I'll give you a short story. So when I tried to get into recruitment, I was 19 years of age, and I went into a high street recruitment company, I won't name who they are, and they turned me down simply because I didn't have a degree. It's as simple as that. Do you have a degree? No. You can't get a job here. And I think it's changed now, the industry. And it's changed for the better because it's untapped talent. Now, some people don't always have the opportunity to go to university. Some people don't always have the opportunity to be able to go out and have a certain amount of work experience to be able to get into that role. But if you can mark the behaviours and you can look at the behaviours of someone and they fit into what your vision is, probably get there and they'll be successful. And what it actually does is it opens the door to untapped talent. Whereas previously people would fish from a very small pool. It has to be a certain university, it has to be a certain background, it has to be a certain amount of GCSEs. Whereas now, I think one thing we've learned coming out of COVID, flexible working and a number of other things, is that it takes many different people to make an organisation successful. And by looking at behaviours, if you think about behaviours, you talked about Johnny drawing on the wall. It's the same. Behaviours of children, what we teach our children, transcends across the globe. So we don't say, no, it's got to be like this, do we?
No.
A good child is someone from that background. What we actually say is if they have the right behaviours, they'll turn out to be a good human being regardless of their background. And that's what I want to stress. It's about, if you can get behaviours right and recruit to behaviours, you can have a fabulous business without looking at all of these minutiae on the CV.
Yeah, 100%. Really will vary up the kind of people that you're getting into your business, the difference of opinion. I think that's one of the really eye-opening statistics that has been from a McKinsey study around hiring diverse mindsets. Actually, it adds so much more. People are always talking about adding to the bottom line. It's all about more revenue, more profit. That's business, right? That's what drives business. Well, actually, there's so many statistics about different people to who you would normally hire, who probably are behavioural fit people if they're succeeding in your business, actually driving that profitability for your business. So if you're not thinking about behaviours and you're not thinking about what kind of people you want in your business, and rather than just focusing on the CV, you're potentially holding your own business back, I think.
Yeah, and I agree in terms of where you can hold your business back, because often we tend to think that it is all about bottom line, and of course bottom line is important. I wouldn't be the job that I'm doing if it wasn't for bottom line, of course, but bottom line is a byproduct of the right behaviours and the right performance within the team, right? So it takes, and I'm going to use that word team, it takes more than one person to make a successful team, which is why you can't focus just on high performance. And if you can get the behaviours right and you can get the culture right, then the revenue is a byproduct. Because happy, motivated people, where they all have a similar goal, where they all work to a similar ethos, similar values and similar behaviours, they will always be successful, right? Now, as long as they are the right behaviours, right? Not if it's toxic behaviours. So if you've got the right behaviours and people are demonstrating those behaviours, they'll go in above and beyond. I've seen an example recently, so obviously, there's tough times in the economy. We have all the right behaviours, we have a great culture here, and we saw just after January, people probably got a little bit relaxed, okay? So in terms of they should have been pushing a bit harder. I was able to have a call with them and say, look, we need to push harder. And they've done it with a smile on their face. They've increased their activities.
Absolutely, straight away. Picked up the mantle, off they went, because it's the right behaviours, right? It's people who they understand why they need to be doing X, Y, Z, and all you need to do sometimes is just remind them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also worth remembering that when you're creating people have the behaviours, but it's also about constantly those behaviours. So it's habit forming. Often, we all get up in the morning, it's raining outside, and we go out and we feel miserable when you think, I don't really feel like it today. And our job is to reinforce those good behaviours and make sure that people are staying above those boundaries. Exactly what you said with Johnny. I remember one of my kids when he was younger, you won't appreciate me saying this, but he comes and draws on the wall, right? And tell him off, you can't draw on the wall anymore. Okay, so these are behaviours we expect, this is what you should be doing. Doesn't draw on the wall for 6 weeks, and then 6 weeks later, having a bit of a meltdown, goes and draws on the wall again. Now, what I need to do as a parent, if I would have left that would have been it. It would have been like the 16th chapel, right? He would have been on there, we would have been painting murals and all sorts. But it's sometimes remembering that it's not a foolproof plan. I'm not going to click my fingers and say, we've got the behaviours right, we've recruited, now we're successful. It's constantly monitoring those behaviours. It's making sure that we hold ourselves accountable as leaders to the same behaviours as our people, and then we create those boundaries. And then when little Johnny goes to draw on the wall again, right, eventually after the 5th, 6th, or in my kid's case, 10th time, they'll stop doing it. And they will start, and they'll be a happier person for it. And that's really what's at the core of what I'm trying to achieve. I haven't successfully done it yet, right? So we're heading in the right direction, but I don't ever think it's something that you can say, tick, we've done. I think there's an evolution, there's a time, and I see lots of companies have mission statements, say that's who we are, but actually a mission statement should continue to evolve as your company and people evolve as well.